Welcome to the Golden Age of Cinema podcast, a film review show where our panelists share their take on films from the Golden Age of Cinema, the 1990s. Today, we're joined by host Matthew Sutton and panelists Michael Holmes and Seb Jeames to discuss Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, starring Casper Van Dien, Dina Meyer, Dennis Richards, and Neil Patrick Harris. We hope you enjoy the show.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Golden Age of Cinema, the podcast where we review entries into the 90s pantheon of the Golden Age of Cinema, as was christened on a drunken morning in Barbados several moons ago. As usual, I want to welcome my panelists, Seb Jeames and Mike Holmes. Evening, fellas.
Hello, Matty.
Good evening.
And following last week's entry of Cape Fear, this week we have moved on to Starship Troopers. And whilst I know that my other two panelists don't agree with me on this, it's a hell of a roller coaster of quality that we've done so far. A quick recap. Week 1, we did Point Break. Week 2, 4 Rooms. Week 3, Cape Fear. And now we move on to Starship Troopers, which was 1997, I believe. Seb, I think it was your choice. So as per usual, I'll hand over you to give us some background, please.
Thanks very much. So Starship Troopers is a 1997 American satirical military science fiction action film directed by Paul Verhoeven and written by Edward Newmeyer. It originally came from an unrelated script called Bug Hunt at Outpost 9, but eventually licensed the name Starship Troopers from the science fiction novel by Robert A. Heinlein. The story follows a young soldier named Johnny Rico and his exploits in the Mobile Infantry, a futuristic military unit. Rico's military career progresses from recruit to non-commissioned officer, and finally to officer against the backdrop of an interstellar war between mankind and an insectoid species known as arachnids. It received mostly negative reviews upon release from critics, but has garnered a more mixed reception in retrospect. It grossed $55 million in the US and a total of $121 million worldwide against its budget of little over $100 million. The film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects in 1998, and in 2012, Slant magazine ranked it film number 20 on its list of the top 100 films from the 1990s, the Golden Age of Cinema. The film inspired a series of sequels, 2 live action and 2 animated, and an animated TV show called Roughneck Starship Trooper Chronicles, which ran for 2 seasons in 1999 and 2000.
Well done for reading the Wikipedia entry, which I also read just before starting this podcast.
It's a good entry.
Right, okay. Mikey, I'll pass it over to you. As we usually kind of cover, when did you first watch this and what were your thoughts?
So I first watched this at the cinema in early 1998. It released slightly later in Australia than in the States. I had noticed the advertisements for it at the cinema a few months before, the billboard Starship Troopers, and it piqued my interest because I had actually read the Robert Heinlein novel several years before, which was an interesting and at times odd and even confronting sort of book. So I was sort of watching out for it when it was released at the cinema. I had also, incidentally, just finished my own boot camp in the Australian Army a few months before. So the militaristic or the military theme of it was interesting to me. I think when I first watched it, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't faithful to Robert Heinlein's book. It follows it along sort of broadly, but it's quite different in a couple of ways, which we'll touch on later. Fundamentally, though, I did find it entertaining. I thought it was pretty funny. It was obviously not meant to be taken seriously, and director Paul Verhoeven, you could sort of see his sort of fingerprints on it, a la Total Recall, a la RoboCop. So fundamentally, I found it an entertaining movie.
Great. Cinema slightly behind in Australia. But,
Slightly, yes.
Okay. Seb, what about you?
So I first came to Starship Troopers through the TV show when I was a kid, and watching that on sort of Saturday mornings. And then when I was about 15, 16, I watched it with a friend of mine who introduced me to it, basically saying that this movie was fucking awesome because there are guns and tits and gore and whatnot. Which on that, it did duly deliver. And obviously, when I watched it then, I was mainly focusing on those sort of aforementioned features. But having, gone to university and matured as a man, in
Somewhat.
my opinion, maybe not in others, I revisited it and realized that there were a lot more layers to it than just what was on the surface, and just sort of fell down the rabbit hole and totally engrossed myself in all the subtextual layers of the film, its parody elements, its political elements, its satirical elements, and really did enjoy exploring all of those areas. And watching it back after that as well, I've just found it a really, really fascinating entry into the golden age of cinema.
Nice. Well, much like Four Rooms, I watched this film for the first time as part of the podcast. So yeah, just really, really interesting entry for me. I kind of feel that it's a sci-fi mashup of Saving Private Ryan and Star Wars. But yeah, I mean, I won't rip it to bits. That'll come later. But it was enjoyable enough. Some of the actors who I'd heard you guys chatting about on WhatsApp, like the ginger girl was Dina
Meyer.
I remembered her from Friends. Denise Richards, probably about 2 years removed from Turner's Christmas in
Christmas
James Bond.
Jones.
And of course, Wild Things.
Yeah, she didn't use the intervening 2-year period to refine her acting talents in either way. But enjoyable. Do always like seeing a chiseled jaw, so I thought the front man was barely
Casper Van Dien.
I'd not seen him in anything else.
Yeah.
Quick look at his IMDb, pretty nondescript career, but it was a Seb James movie. So we'll leave that there, but going on to the next bits. Seb, why don't you take us through where we're going to lead this discussion?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's several layers to this film. So the first layer that anyone can enjoy this film on, or not enjoy it, or critically receive it, is its sort of primary level of a cheesy, gory action war movie, which has all of this weird mashup of 90s high school movie come, Saving Private Ryan in space. And I think that you can enjoy this film on that level as it is, because it kind of serves pretty functionally well. You kind of laugh along with it. You think it's a bit ridiculous, but you can have it sort of on in the background and just sort of enjoy the good bits as and when they come. And that's just sort of one layer that you can enjoy this film on. So I just wanted to know what your guys' thoughts were on sort of that essence of the film.
As that sort of first take, that sort of first layer, as you describe it, Sebi, if you're a 15-year-old boy, this film is ticking a lot of boxes.
As I was when I first watched it.
Indeed. I'm not going to elaborate on those now, but I'm sure anyone that's seen the film will know what I'm referring to. I think the sort of the schlocky action, the entertaining part of it, the fighting bugs in space, we're going to war, young people together joining the military, everyone's fit and young and off to have a good time, etc. So
as you were, Mikey.
Yeah, as I was. Thank you, Matty. As that sort of first layer of the film, it delivers as long as you don't take it too seriously.
Yeah, I think actually that might have been my issue. I had absolutely zero idea of what this would entail before watching it until about 15 minutes in, where I thought, right, okay, I think this is satire. I tell you what, I did enjoy it in some ways. One thing that, and I'm sure we'll unpick this at greater depth through the chat, but they tried to cram a hell of a lot in 2 hours. Like, it was as if they tried to do like a trilogy in just shy of 120 minutes. So it just rollocked along at a really snappy pace, but it just was really, really quick and quite hard to follow, I thought, a lot of it. But yeah, in what you outlined earlier, Seb, I think it does work. I mean, 15-year-old you probably wanked yourself to death to this. Yeah, it was enjoyable for it, but in the golden age of cinema, I thought there were other films that kind of did this just as well, if not better. It reminded me of a bit like, I think it was around the same time as well, a bit like Mars Attacks.
Yeah, Mars Attacks, about that time.
Yeah, very, very similar. That B-movie takeoff.
To be taken seriously.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was eminently watchable. It took me a while to realise that it was satire. Kudos to the director.
Paul Verhoeven, yeah. So the sort of second level that you can understand it on is as you say, this kind of it does rollick along at this ridiculous pace, and it goes through a high school movie, a war movie, a sci-fi movie, all wrapped up in a pretty generic hero's journey, and it kind of goes through and just parodies all of those. Like the high school scenes are just kind of like so cheesy and ridiculous. I think, specifically the sports scene where you've got all sorts, you've got all of these actors who are, as you say, terrible actors, but purposefully sort of handpicked from all of these 90s high school TV shows at the time, like Melrose Place or Beverly Hills or 90210, that kind of stuff, and just plonking them in their ordinary setting in the high school with this sort of background of weird political stuff that, these war shots, these propaganda shots, these sort of aliens, and you're like, okay, what the hell's kind of going on? But you're just shown this sports jock and a nerd and a prom queen, the best douche that's ever put to cinema. And then it goes into this war movie, does a bunch of war tropes, sort of the boot camp, the war is hell motif, all of that. And then, it's obviously got this sci-fi spoof as well, which is kind of ripping the piss out of Star Trek and Star Wars and all of those other, like, Mars Attacks and things like that. So it's very much like that parody level is another one which I really found was enjoyable to have a look at.
And lest we forget, it included a member of the Busey clan, which obviously means, much like Point Break, it's worth its entry in the golden age of cinema.
Jake Busey, another very modest filmography, but he's got the Busey grin.
Yeah, the teeth just gave it away, didn't they? Because never seen him in anything, and hardly likely, having had a look at his IMDb, likely to see him in anything again. Just thought, there's a thin stream of shit running through all this. The Busey clan seem to be joining it all together. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Mikey, on Seb's summary there?
I think Seb makes a number of interesting points, and I think if you think about the stages of the movie, you know what Seb is saying definitely holds up. You know, there's the high school stage, and you know it sort of reminded me a little bit of that one of those parody movies, Not Another Teen Movie. You know, where you watch that, it's every 90s teen movie that you've ever seen, and then it moves on to the boot camp, and you know, again, it's like any sort of boot camp, almost any boot camp movie you've sort of ever seen, excluding Full Metal Jacket, of course.
But with the violence hyped up
with
to...
the violence, you know, and I'll come to that in a minute. And then, you know, moving off, they go to war, and it's sort of like a lot of war movies you've seen before. I think where it starts to sort of depart from these typical tropes, or where I think Verhoeven uses these tropes, you know, as vehicles, is there are these little odd things sort of sprinkled through the movie, you know, whether it's reference to sort of public execution, you know, criminals found guilty, you know, today, execution night at 6, the flogging, or the, you know, the fact that only veterans can vote, sort of thing. He's lifted this from Robert Heinlein's novel, but he's really cherry picked a lot. And when you talk, Maddie, about you seem to cram a lot into 2 hours, I think there was an attempt to remain somewhat faithful to the novel, and there's a lot going on in the novel. So if you've read the novel, you can sort of see why he's done certain things, why he's tried to cram, you know, so much in, and you know, you understand where these sort of seemingly odd things, you know, the public flogging or whatever, you know, where that comes in. But you know, if you don't have that reference point, it will seem a little bit, you know, perhaps a little bit confusing. But you know, again, I think, Seb, you make a good point. You know, he uses these tropes, you know, as vehicles for his main, you know, to get us to the main destination.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea that it came from a book. I think I vaguely, was it a video game? Maybe, I don't remember.
Yeah, I think there was a video game.
Yeah, so I think that may be the only way that I knew anything about it. So yeah, I think, Mikey, you're right. It did leave me a little bit flummoxed what was going on, and just slightly to unpick more why I think a lot is tried to achieve in the runtime. You've kind of got the embryonic coming of age story, which takes about 10 minutes when I think they're all in high school. And then like the first battle where he ends up, what's the guy called?
Johnny Rico.
Where Rico ends up having to get his leg reconstructed. And then the final bit where he seems to become a lieutenant in about 3 days, and then ends up a high-ranking official in the army, or the modern infantry. But you could genuinely break every one of those films up into those segments into one separate film. So that's why I just felt like it went by so fast. I found it so hard to, and kudos to him to attempt to try and do it, because as you say, there's the high school romantic comedy kind of thing. He ends up sleeping with a girl on prom, a bit like American Pie, which is coming in a few weeks. The first battle scene when he's becoming making his way through the army, he's going to quit. Oh, actually, this is going to bring me to one other point. Where in the hell is it set? I mean, these guys this is one of my problems that I had. So they're from Buenos Aires, and then they reference Geneva. So I never was actually particularly clear if this was set on planet Earth.
Yes.
So it's set on planet Earth, and it's a futuristic society where the entirety, and I think this is the main sort of meat of the of the sort of subtext of this film, is that you're right. You're not really explicitly ever told what this society is or how it functions in its entirety, but you just have these nagging questions that, as the propaganda bit kind of, keeps on asking you, do you want to know more? Do you want to know more? Do you want to know more? Because there are all of these questions that are left unanswered. Yes, it's a sort of, it seems to be a monoculture version of Earth where the whole human race is one nation state called the Federation, which has all of these other, interesting sort of bits that you kind of hear about in the background. But they're from Buenos Aires, and the only thing that attaches them to any sort of Latin culture are their names, like Flores and Ibanez and Rico. Apart from that, they just look like sort of pretty bog standard A-type Americans.
Does that translate to the book, Mikey? Is it?
It to a certain extent, yes. I mean, the book, there's more detail in the book, and there's more detail, but even in the book, it's not sort of explicitly said. You just deduce that, okay, there's Earth has a single government. There are no countries per se. People seem to have moved around a lot. When he goes off to boot camp in the book, there are people from Europe, Japan, Australia, all over the world, pulled together. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more, Latino in the book, but again, you sort of get the impression that maybe planet Earth has been Americanized in the book, maybe. But again, more detail in the book, but you still sort of you got to fill in the blanks to a certain extent. Put it that way.
And this is why this film, in my opinion, really does build on multiple viewings, because when you watch it that first time, you just sort of see, kind of the surface level of what it is. But when you watch it sort of more and more times, you kind of get to understand that there's something not quite familiar with this society. And that's where I think the real interesting point and subtext of this film is found.
I would say a key difference between the book and the movie is the book. Paul Verhoeven has made a satire on fascism, right? And we'll talk about that more in a second. But the book, I wouldn't necessarily say is fascist. It's certainly militaristic, and it has some odd sort of features, political features, if you will. Only veterans can vote. There's an endorsement of corporal and capital punishment, but it's not overtly fascist the way Verhoeven has made this movie.
Oh, I mean, come on. There are some other good bits which I'm sure resonate with members of our panel. Making it out on your own, breaking away from the bosom of mummy and daddy and their wealth. I'm saying nothing. Sorry, Seb, what were you saying?
Very good. Very good. Yes. Where was I? Shit.
Zegama Beach.
Zegama Beach, baby. It's not there anymore.
It's not. No.
It's not. How? No one knows. Right. So as Mikey was saying, Paul Verhoeven famously hasn't read the book.
Of course he hasn't.
Apparently he read 2 chapters and just said, okay, this is fascist. I think the writer may have read it. I can't say either way, 100% sure. You probably did. But, as I said in the introduction, it was originally under a different working title, Bug Hunter Outpost 9. And only in retrospect did it get, not in retrospect, but as it sort of was set in motion, did it get this title, title to Starship Troopers. I think because they didn't even think that, they could get the rights to it.
People saw the similarities between similarities between the two.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of militaristic state fighting bugs in outer space, yeah, we'll just slap Starship Troopers on there. But you're quite right, Mikey, when you say Paul Verhoeven, and he's on record for saying this in several different sources, that he set out to make a satire on a fascistic state. And this is where sort of the questions around this state sort of occurs. Like, well, you're never overtly told these guys are fascists. In fact, you see a lot of good things about the society. You know, there's no poverty, but you don't see any poverty. Everyone seems pretty healthy and sexy and attractive. There's not an ugly person in this movie. There is world peace. There may not be sort of intergalactic peace. There is world peace.
Gender equality.
There's gender equality. There's racial equality. There doesn't seem to be many sort of problems with the society until you kind of get a few hints here and there. You know, obviously there's the propaganda films which are taken, and sort of parodied and inspired by the works of Leni Riefenstahl. You get the flags and the costumes, which kind of have some pretty Nazi imagery. I'm thinking specifically, you've got Doogie Howser SS who walks in full stormtrooper regalia, and you think, oh shit.
I think his uniform is particularly overt, but they're all, if you've ever watched the History Channel and seen any one of 1,000 different documentaries on the Third Reich, you would see that the uniforms in Starship Troopers are, very much inspired by the Third Reich. And I mean, I noticed when I watched it the other day, the flags that they drape the coffins with and wave around, the sort of green and blue, and then a sort of what looks to sort of be like a plane in the center, but actually, it's a half jump to have an eagle, and if you change the colors from green and blue to red and black, you basically have a flag from the Third Reich. It's very much inspired by the Third Reich, and he's just made some key changes to make it a little less obvious.
Yeah, and I think some of the sort of subtextual bits, or the bits that you definitely wouldn't quite get the first time or even the second time round. I'm thinking specifically when you listen to what the teachers are saying whilst they're in school, you kind of begin to raise your eyebrows a bit. Ratchek, the political and moral philosophy teacher, talks about the decline of democracy and how the social scientists brought the world to the brink, and how it was the veterans who seized control, and how all authority is derived from violence, and sort of gives all this stuff and talks about civilian versus citizenship, and about how anything given has no value, something has to be earned, which you're kind of thinking, okay, well, this is a bit like, it's not, it doesn't scream like these guys are Third Reich, but it just is different from what we have. Interesting, okay, a bit odd. When you're watching it the first time, you're looking at Casper Van Dien's chiseled jaw and Denise Richards, lakes for eyes. And then you go to the biology teacher who talks about the selfless Sarkarian sand beetle that is superior in all of these different ways and is the perfect selfless member of society that reproduces in large numbers and has no fear of death and has no ego and things like that. And you just think, okay, that's kind of like a bit weird to point out, because that existential fear of demise and that individuality is something that we in the Western world value as one of our highest values. So to kind of just like undercut all of that just makes you start to ask questions about like, what is really going on here?
Wow. Yeah, I didn't see the Third Reich stuff at all until the big shoulder pad leather jacket, really. So yeah, kudos to you lads. That's reading a lot into it from a 15-year-old's perspective about guns and tits. So
well, this is why this film is definitely more than it seems on the surface, and it's quite interesting to see that when it first came out, it was panned by critics totally, but then began to get a bit of an appreciation in retrospect.
quite.
Yeah. There's I think one of the really interesting things about just another thing to comment about this film is the way that this whole war is started. Obviously, this film was released in 1997, but the big turning point in the film is when the meteor hits Buenos Aires and destroys it, and it's very much like a 9/11 moment, which is interesting that film 1997 kind of got that sentiment and scarily accurate to 9/11. You just think if this film was released, midway through the 2000s, how different would it have been interpreted?
I think that's a good point, Seb. I recall there's several films. I think The Siege is another one. There's several films released pre 9/11 that do seem to sort of capture that essence, as you say. And I mean, when I watched it the other day, I did think, they're all watching the TV screen. Everyone's glued to it. Everyone's congregating to watch. And it did remind me very much of 9/11. And I remember, when 9/11 happened, people were going around saying, well, this is just like a movie. So I think, Verhoeven he captured it well.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that moment, which is, if we look at it sort of, what happened in that moment, a meteor hits Earth and destroys Buenos Aires, right? That is used as as sort of an excuse to make a full frontal assault on the bug's home planet, which is half a galaxy away and surrounded by asteroids, right? So we're kind of told that, they believe that the bugs launched the asteroid into space across half of the galaxy to hit a specific city, right? But when they go and assault the bug's home planet, they think that the artillery will be light and sporadic and random instead of pre-planned and devastating. So there are just some things that don't quite add up, and there's room there for you to interpret that, well, is this a conspiracy or an excuse that is used by the Federation to go to war? Because all fascist states thrive on war, on having an external enemy that everyone can unite against.
Which is a bug.
Which are the bugs? What more disgusting and threatening than a giant bug?
The only good bug is a dead bug.
One of the best lines in the film. bit deeper than you thought there, Matthew, eh?
I think you two maybe just were a bit lonely when you watched it.
Again, it's important to make the distinction between, the book and the movie. Another key difference between the book and the movie is, in the book, the mobile infantry are called the mobile infantry because every trooper wears a sort of suit of external armor which can sort of jump and fly. And so the mobile infantry really are mobile. That they attack cities and they sort of jump and fly over them, devastating everything, etc., etc. For this movie, they couldn't do that, for technology reasons, etc. The CGI wasn't, we can tell the CGI wasn't that advanced in 1997, 96.
Still got an Oscar nod, though.
It was just on the CGI, by the way. It was done by a legendary special effects artist who worked on RoboCop and Jurassic Park and things like that. And I think that even today, those CGI and those effects, for the large part, hold up.
I think certainly compared to a lot of others, for sure.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot worse, and I mean, you can go and, I don't know, Deep Blue Sea or something else from the late 90s where the CGI really looks CGI. Eraser with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the CGI crocodiles. So I think the CGI, it's workable. The special effects in this actually look pretty good. I mean, they haven't sort of tried to make things look futuristic or as Elon Musk might design them. That I think I sort of see most of the spaceships as Volvos in the sky. It's sort of clunky and mechanical, but it works. But I think the book really isn't, a satire on fascism. Well, I think some people can claim it, but I don't think it is. Whereas Verhoeven has gone out to make something that is very much a satire on fascism. The fact that he hasn't read the book himself, I think, you can infer that he's just gone off to do what he wants to do, and basically sort of slap the label. And the mobile infantry, calling it the mobile infantry, whilst being ignorant of what's in the book, what actually the mobile infantry means, is an example of that.
Yeah, I think that is a good point to say that the film and the book are very different, and they have very different aims. The film is clearly an attempted satire. Whether it works or not, I think, is actually quite interesting because, Matt, as you were saying, you didn't really spot that it was a satire until, Doogie Howser walks out in an SS uniform.
Well, yeah, I didn't spot it until I was told explicitly it was, which probably says all that needs to be said.
Yeah, which kind of says, which is probably the reason why this film has so much mixed reviews, because it isn't explicitly obvious. It's pretty subtle. Slash, could you say, does it even say enough? Does it actually do enough to get its point across? I think that its choice, using the bugs as the target of this sort of fascistic military angst makes it difficult, because at no point in the film does Verhoeven or the script or the movie in any way successfully have you relate to the bugs or to sort of feel for the bugs or anything like that. They are disgusting and horrendous and terrifying the whole way through. There's no...
Oh, now, come now. Doogie Howser at the end says one of them's afraid. Oh, I felt really sorry for the bug then.
You did? Did you feel sorry? Did you feel sorry for it when it was getting experimented on in the next scene in the propaganda?
Oh, I was very empathetic.
Yeah, well then maybe you can think that...
Seb, that's satire.
There you go. So kind of the point's made that I don't think it does a very good job. If you had something that's slightly more humanistic and something where you think, well, maybe is the Federation right to be pinning this event on the bugs, and are they right to be going to war against these bugs and experimenting on these bugs and capturing in them and killing them in all of these different ways, etc., then you might have been able to get a bit more resonance on the fascistic satire. But I don't think he quite does enough on that for it to totally work.
Let's keep moving on. Why don't we pick out some of our favourite scenes? Mikey, let's go with you.
I think in terms of favourite scenes, I sort of always like the bit where sort of maybe 2/3 of the way through, when they're sort of patrolling these canyons, and then the giant mega bug bursts out of the floor. What do they call it? A flamer or something like that.
The massive beetle.
The massive beetle, and then it shoots some sort of lava type of thing and melts people's arms off and all sorts of things. And Rico jumps on the back, fires his weapon, which seems to have a magazine of about 500 rounds, into the back of the Beetle while it's rodeoing around. Somehow he sort of stays on his feet. Occasionally he's sort of grabbing onto the edge of the crater in the back of the bug to sort of stay in, and then he throws a grenade in, flies off the thing blows up. He's the hero, and then it was it Lieutenant Ratchek. It sort of cuts to the R&R scene, and he says, "Oh, I demand the best, and I give the best." And we have a futuristic violin, whether that's a bit of neon wrapped around the side of it, and a couple of kegs of beer and some footballs, and then they just all shag, and
They all
day out.
shag.
I need you in 10 minutes. No, I'll make it 20.
Make it 20. That's right.
Mateo, how about you?
What was my favourite scene? I think, probably as well. I can't believe I'm about to say this. In drawing a slight parallel with the scene in Apocalypse Now, where they all start celebrating and bonding together on the camp, the scene that Mike has just talked about there, with when there's like a keg of beer and the sports stuff, I thought that was actually quite good fun, where it didn't really take itself too seriously, and Rico was starting to embrace his life as one of the grunts. Another thing that's never really reconciled throughout the whole of the film is he's taught to us, is he smart, is he dumb, he's crap at maths, but he's got a place at Harvard. And I thought
that was really funny. Yeah.
At that stage in the film, when he just became the one of the grunts, as I say, I quite enjoyed that, and I saw that there were parallels to other war type films. There's always that scene, isn't there, in films that involve conflict and are set within the military, where people start to bond, and it was at that stage where the two guys who had said to Rico before about, you can't make fun of the lieutenant, I'd die for him, blah, blah, blah. And then they all started to respect him. So, yeah, I thought that it was quite good. I'll go with that.
My favourite scene is probably has to be the money shot of Xander getting his brain sucked out by the brain bug. because he is the biggest douchebag ever put to cinema, and it is so satisfying to see him meet the most gruesome demise.
Don't hold back, Seb.
It is. I mean, like, come on, isn't he just the most douchiest douche? And then shortly after that as well, them all sort of skipping off arm in arm like the Wizard of Oz on an alien planet with where with an SS officer, a yuppie turned hardened grunt veteran lieutenant, and a Mary Sue pilot with half a tentacle through her shoulder, just sort of walking off arm in arm, was just hilarious.
Right, okay. Well, I think we've covered a lot of points there. It was certainly not a direction I envisaged that going, having only just watched it and come straight from the movie to doing this. So kudos to you guys for giving it some thought in analysing this, not just purely through the prism of a B-movie tits and gun flick, but yeah, some interesting points made. And as ever, we'll move on to the barometer by which we judge all entries into the golden age of cinema, that being the liar metric. For those of you who are freshly joining, we do this based on where we judge every film against the greatest entry into the golden age of cinema. May I add, quite possibly the greatest entry in all of film, that being Jim Carrey's 1997 comedic masterpiece, Liar Liar. Seb, I'll go.
Is that satire?
No, I said that absolutely straight-faced. I'll leave you last, Seb, because it was your
Sure.
choice. Mikey, let's go with you.
I'm going to give this. I'm going to give this 6.5 liars out of 10.
Was that also your Max Cady impression? Because if so, that was very good.
Yeah, thank you. 5.5 for the movie itself, and as I did a few weeks ago, I'm giving it an extra 1 for where I was at the time, how much I enjoyed watching it at the time, the entertaining value of it, and when I watched it, I could relate to aside from the killing the bugs part, I could relate to most of it. So yeah. 6.5 liars out of 10.
And that does beg the question then. I assume you had your own romantic moment in a tent, but we won't delve into that on this episode. So from my perspective, I'm going to give this a 4. At the start of this podcast, it would have been less, but you know what? I'm going to soften on it. However, it can't be above Point Break, which I think I remembered was 5. I think I gave that 5 liars out of 10. So I'll give it a 4. It was an enjoyable watch. I'm actually quite intrigued to potentially read the book, actually. I think I'm quite into that genre of sci-fi.
Well worth read. And if I can just butt in, Robert Heinlein, one of the big 3 of science fiction writers in the mid-20th century, Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury. Robert Heinlein wrote a lot of good stuff, but Starship Troopers is
not one of them.
A book to read and very entertaining.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think I'll definitely check that out. So 4 out of 10 from me. Enjoyable. Yeah, thought it was good. Seb, obviously you.
So every single time I watch this film, it actually goes up in my estimations, and I've actually seen it quite a few times. So I'm gonna rate this pretty highly. It is one of my all-time favorite films, just because it is partly because it is quite bad in places, and I like that about this film, that it is cheesy and that the acting is terrible, but the action's fantastic and the subtext is really trying hard to say something. Whether it does say it or not is up for debate, but I really, really like this film. I'm going to give it a 9 liars out of 10.
Jesus wept. What have you been drinking this evening?
I like the way you've doubled down there, Seb. You doubled down on your position. Just
doubled down big time. Just got to watch it more times. Trust me.
What did you give Cape Fear?
I think I gave.
No, no, you gave it 10, didn't you?
No, I did give it 10. I think I may have given it 9 or an 8.5.
Because of course, only one film gets 10 liars out of it.
One film gets 10 liars out of 10. Yeah, might see a 9.5 here and there, but yeah, for me, it's. I mean, look, it's a film that splits opinion, which I think we've seen from this podcast. A split opinion here.
And indeed, probably is representative of how this whole idea came about on said Barbados beach.
Exactly. Right. Even the worst films in the 1990s, I just love.
Great. Okay. Well, that's been a really interesting discussion. As I think you said, there's not really been a general consensus emerged on that film. It's had a bad, medium, and good, well, very good rating from the panel. But Seb, can you reveal what episode 5 will bring?
So, very, very excitingly, episode 5 brings The Usual Suspects, the 1995 neo-noir mystery film directed by Bryan Singer, starring Stephen Baldwin, Gabrielle Byrne, Benicio del Toro, Kevin Pollak, Shaz Palminteri, Pete Postlethwaite, and Kevin Spacey.
Pete Postlethwaite, what a legend.
You've butchered some pronunciations there, Sammy.
I'm sure I have.
Chaz Palminteri, very regular mafia-style actor from the 90s, though he plays a policeman in this movie. This movie I'm looking forward to very much. It's an excellent film, I think. Really made Kevin Spacey and Benicio del Toro, prominent stars. And the other, Gabriel Byrne's a very solid performer. Pete Postlethwaite, sadly no longer with us, but according to Spielberg, probably the greatest actor in the world at the time.
Wow, blimey.
That made him sound like a Carlsberg. But yeah, great film.
The only one slight against him, he was a Lancastrian. But other than that, top man.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for that, gents. Look forward to speaking to you all soon.
Thanks, guys. Great stuff.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of the Golden Age of Cinema. And if you did, join us next week where we'll be reviewing Bryan Singer's 1995 neo-noir mystery classic, The Usual Suspects, starring Stephen Baldwin, Gabrielle Byrne, Benicio del Toro, Kevin Pollak, and Kevin Spacey, featuring Chaz Palminteri and Pete Postlethwaite. So have a watch and join us next time on The Golden Age of Cinema.